And I understand that some of you probably have not had an introduction to Judy before, and yet all of you no doubt looked at the introduction to the course and just to make sure that she'd been to college and saw that she was at Hope, and then maybe even noticed that she crossed the border into Buckeye territory to get her PhD. And nevertheless, we've let her back. I want to call attention to another word, though, in that description of her, and that is interested. Judy is interested, and it lists some of the things pertinent to this course that she's interested in. But Judy is one of those people who is interested in a lot of things. I think it was John F. Kennedy who said, the key to be universally interesting is to be universally interested. And Judy is one of those people in my mind who fits JFK's definition of a universally interesting person. If you want to run cross paths with Judy, look on what's going on in town. Well, in non-COVID days, look at what's going on in town and see those events that might have a very interesting speaker or be a topic that's sure to stimulate good thought and discussion, and you will no doubt find Judy there. But there's another place you can find Judy usually that's also pertinent to this course, and that's in areas of community concern and work on behalf of the community and helping foster groups within the community and keep them running. Judy makes herself very abundant, her presence very abundant in those areas as well. So it shows that she herself comes at the subject matter of human nature and community from a perspective of hands-on involvement in the community in which she is living. And so we, on behalf of all the other students, Judy, we want to thank you for an interesting subject. I have, noticed people comparing Golding's Lord of the Flies with similar works of fiction. This is the first time I get to look at it, an actual historical event where people were desperately trying to put community together. So thank you, Judy, and we are all ears, and hopefully more than that event.
Thanks for that great introduction. And when you said hands-on, it automatically made me think of the fruit that Eve picked from the tree, because I've been fascinated lately with the goodness and evil and human nature and what makes people good and what makes them evil. And this is what drew me, I think, to reading Lord of the Flies back when I taught it back in 2007, although I had some experience recently having taught in China. And that made me interested in the Shandong compound story that I heard about. And it was recommended to me by David Myers of the Hope College psychology faculty. But I was drawn to this course again right now because of our emphasis at this term on sustainability. And so I was thinking, how can humanities contribute to sustainability? Usually you think of humanities as being well, it's more a term of environment. You think of science, medicine, technology as being the area where that can be talked about. But sustainability, I think we know about it now, just in the past 4 years of our own government, that we have issues of sustainability that have to do with, well, political science, but the nature of people and how it is that they come upon the things they value and how do they understand what truth is and how do they build consensus. We're going to talk about, I think, as we focus on Lord of the Flies today, we're going to talk about how it was that they were able to sustain their community. And there were so many impediments that they had to deal with. We'll talk about those as well. I see some other people have joined us now. And I think what I'd want to do, because we don't all know each other and because we're going to be together for 3 sessions, I hope, I'd like for each one of us to maybe say if when they first, or when, if what's their exposure to Lord of the Flies? Is this the first time they read it, or when was the first time you read it? And I'll start with Anne. Could you tell us that answer?
Yes, this is the first time I've read it, although I've always been aware of the title and it sort of being a cult favorite, but no, I have never read it before.
Okay, Jean, can you unmute yourself first? Jean?
Yeah, I read it probably back in high school. I just sort of remembered the general premise of it, but I didn't remember the details.
How did it affect you the second time you read it?
Shantung Compound affected me more.
Okay, we'll talk about that later. Okay.
But I really identified with the leader, how frustrating it must have been for him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sue, when did you first read this?
Well, I read it probably in high school or my early 20s at some point in time, a long time ago. And I just reread it over the weekend, and a lot of it I could remember, but the descriptions are so vivid in this book, and what's happening with the boys and the flies and the decomposition, and then just the failure of them to be able to sort themselves as a group and form tribes. It was a pretty remarkable book, and I don't remember the time period that they were on this island. Does it ever tell us exactly how many months or days or anything?
You know, I don't think so. I mean, we don't really even get a notion of seasons on there in it.
Long, and their clothes wore out, so I suspect it's over several months because they're talking about tying their hair back and
right. Length of hair, I guess, would be an indication of passage of time. Yeah, but I'm guessing it wasn't a year. I think it was less than a year somehow.
Anyway, it's a remarkable book. And
okay, go ahead, Sue. Yeah, keep going.
I just started reading Shantung Compound last night, so I've got that yet to go. So
okay. Tom, when did you first read The Lord of the Flies? You want to unmute yourself? Unmute.
College or high school, and it's been vividly memorable to me ever since. It kind of checks me up every time I meet anybody named Jack.
Deborah Williamson, can you unmute yourself and tell us when you first read this book?
Sure, I remember it vividly. I was probably a senior in high school, and my brother had entered the Army, and he left a bunch of books and his typewriter in my bedroom while he left for the service. And so I learned to type, and I read all of his books. And so that was the first time, and I read it again probably I'm going to say 20 years ago, and I read it with a couple kids of mine and discussed it.
When you say kids, like family members or students?
Yeah, my kids.
Okay.
We used to read, in the evenings, and that was
nice.
Yeah.
Great. Bill?
Did you say Phil?
Yeah, I did. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Phil Harrington, when did you first read this?
I was in 8th grade, and I don't know what, it was on a reading list. We had to choose a book, and I chose this, and I don't remember why, but I remember the impact, because up until then, I think the books that I had been reading were things like Homer Price and his amazing donut machine, or whoever that other kid was who went off in space, on a rocket or whatever. This is the first time it dawned on me that books could be about something, that books could have significance and make you think and make you feel. I do remember feeling sympathy with Ralph, that anguish. And with Piggy, because I grew up with bronchial asthma, so I automatically had some identification with him as well.
Terry, could you tell us when you first read this book?
Yeah, this summer we were going through the UP in our car on a trip, and we listened to it read by the author, and it was amazing. In fact, we wanted to just sit we would get somewhere and we'd sit there because we didn't want to turn it off. It was just it's such a good book. And my husband is a high school teacher, and he really enjoyed it. But it's a great book, and I had never read it before.
Okay, so we've gotten it in different means or media and different times in our lives that we've read it, and it's wonderful. Let's talk about the setting for this story. We talked about the time of year. Well, the extent of it, let's say, it's probably less than a year. Where does this occur? Anyone?
Oh, tropical island someplace.
I'd say the Pacific.
And what time in history did this occur?
World War II.
World War II, likely reference to atomic bomb in this,
Mhm.
and how did they end up? How did the boys end up on this island? How did they get there?
Plane crash.
Plane crash. And there's reference to what's called a scar early on in the first chapter. The plane crash apparently left a scar, although they didn't seem to have much of the plane, if any of it, to be able to salvage materials from in order to make things. They couldn't use part of it for a shelter. Apparently, the plane just kind of skimmed the surface of the tree forest and dropped. The boys dropped out of the plane somehow. Any other comments about the setting for this? Was it a barren island? Was it rocky? Any descriptions of geography that come to your mind?
Well, it was a combination because it had a beach where they settled, but there were the rocky, and I was curious, they talked about the pink color of the rocks and the platform and then the castle rock, but then it also had the very lush and thick forest and the mountain.
Right.
And it had a bit of everything.
Right. There's some reference to Coral Island, which is the title of a book that was written a century before this, and it was a book about boys on an island just having adventures, and things worked out very well. And I think that that the author of this book wanted to not just be an adventure story. He wanted it to make a comment on human nature. And so he's got a little bit, it's a darker book by far. But the pink might be related to coral, perhaps.
Very Hobbesian. And a lot of islands don't have water supply and therefore food enough to support people. This one obviously did. This was a livable place.
What were their foods?
Fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And wild pigs.
And the pigs.
Right, fruit and the pigs. And some of the fruits and some of the other things, the vegetable matter that they ate, made some of them sick. They had to do a trial and error to figure out what foods would agree with them or not. And so there could have been poisonous things there that could have affected people too. But yeah, they apparently didn't have a lot of vegetables. It was mainly fruit and wild pig. What did the boys bring with them? I remember, Sue Bolander, you taught a big read course that was about what they took with them and had to do with Vietnam. And I wonder what we can remember about what these boys took with them. What did they have with them as resources to use to give them some sustainability?
Well, Jack had his knife.
Yes, Jack and the knife.
But other than their clothes, and of course the choir had, at the beginning, had robes, although I don't remember them ever really being mentioned all that much again as being used for shelter or anything.
I think, though, that is significant, those choir robes, because it's the choir that becomes the aggressive hunters.
Yes.
And is Jack the choir director?
Yes.
Okay. So they're bringing with them some of their past from their pre-island existence. There are some images that we have in our mind that are molded in some ways by the past of these children.
Well, and I think Piggy had his glasses, and then he also had his asthma with his illness, but he'd also lost his parents and lives with
That's right. So he was an orphan. Yes.
So he's dealt with loss before. So I think that was, and he seemed like, even though he looked like a soft little boy and kind of round and whatever, he had a lot of wisdom. He was one that would take time to kind of think things through, and I think people did appreciate him in some way. And his appearance didn't help him, but I think his wisdom and taking time to try and figure things out was really admirable.
There's a part on page 18 in my book, and my book looks like this. Your books may look different, and our page numbers may not be the same, but this is something that happened in the very first chapter. And I want to read some lines here about the interaction with people and having to do with names. This is page 18 in my book. This is an idea. The boys apparently don't know themselves. They didn't know each other very well on the airplane or anything. The choir boys apparently knew each other, but they were little people. They were probably about 6 years old with their leader, Jack. And then there were a miscellaneous other group, some other on the plane. But they're introducing themselves in the middle, say, of chapter 1. We'd better all have names, said Ralph. So I'm Ralph. We got most names, said Peggy. I got them just now. Kids' names, said Mary-Do. Why should I be Jack? I'm Mary-Do. And he's the only one that claims a surname as well as a first name. And that, I think, gives him a little bit more status. I'm thinking because he has claim to title, at least a connection to family, certainly something that Peggy doesn't have. And Ralph turned to him quickly. That was the voice of one who knew his own mind. Then went on Peggy. That boy I forgot. You're talking too much, said Jack Mary-Do. Shut up, fatty. Laughter arose. He's not fatty, cried Ralph. His real name's Piggy. Piggy, Piggy, Piggy. Oh, Piggy. And there had been a conversation between the two of them before that. Anybody remember the conversation when Piggy and Ralph first meet?
Yes, we never knew Piggy's real name, but he said that he could be called anything, but please don't call him Piggy. He told.
And so what did Ralph do? He
called him Piggy.
Right. And so I think we have in the beginning here, even the very first conflict between people who at the very end turned to be pretty much very close allies. And today the word, I guess, is microaggression. When they introduced themselves, I think Piggy first asked Ralph his name, and Ralph said what his name was, and he was waiting for Ralph to ask Piggy, what's your name? And instead, we get this dialogue that ends up with Piggy we never learn what his first name is. And so there's a part of, I think, civilization and creating community has to do with knowing people's names. And I think it was an idea of Piggy early on to find out who the people are, what are their names, and in effect have a census so you can tell if somebody's missing or not. And early on, there was one that went missing. There was a reference to one of the children who had a birthmark on his face. He was the one that shyly came forward because he was afraid to speak. He was one of the little ones. And he picked up the conch and he started saying, there's some beasties, there's some snake-like creatures, there's some awful things on this island that I'm scared of. And I think that Jack at that point sort of mocked him or belittled him for his fear. And after that, we really don't hear or see much more from on the island. And I read somewhere that there were 3 people that lost their lives on the island. And I think the first one probably was the boy with the scar on his face.
Right.
And so, again, it's the scar on the face is an identifier, but it also was something that set the little one apart to a point where he appeared to be a kind of weak one. And in some ways, because they act in some ways like beasts, there is a kind of, I think, a thing going on here that's sort of like what happens with chickens and roosters and maybe with pigs as well. there is often a so-called runt. You have ever heard the term runt? Where it's the weak one of the batch, and often that one is the one picked on, and it may be the one that doesn't thrive. And I think we have a little of that going on. That's one of the first things I think that begins to undermine the community here, where they are not seeing each other as equals. And of course, there's an age difference. Among the older ones, I think, are Ralph and Peggy and Jack, perhaps Roger, and then a bunch of middle age, I guess, and then the little ones, the littlest ones. So we've got a kind of structure based on age and experience. And one thing that comes up in the Shandong Compound book that was interesting to apply to this is, how do people who are strangers, how do they jockey among themselves to finally set up what is going to be a leader? What's the process, and what is the process here? How do they eventually end up with a leader? How does the process start? How does it proceed? Anybody want to venture into that territory? Now you want to unmute yourself, Sue? Just keep everybody unmuted, I think, right? Because you can jump in.
Just came past here, so it was really loud outside. So anyway,
Okay.
They decided to vote before the choir boys showed up, and that was what they were process of doing. And then Jack shows up, the choir boys, and he said, well, he should be chief because he can reach high C and he's the choir master and blah, blah, blah. But then they boys look around, they said, no, we'll take a vote. And Ralph had the conch shell on his lap, and he looked so quiet and reserved and whatever. So all the boys except the choir boys voted for Ralph, and the choir boys voted for Jack. But in the end, Ralph got chosen to be the leader. So they really are at loggerheads right away in the beginning of the book. The two boys are kind of are vying for power, and maybe Ralph not looking for it so much, but Jack certainly wanting it.
I believe that they found out that Ralph was slightly older. I think that was going to be one of the criteria, who's the oldest.
Okay. But I think it shows a little bit of wisdom on the part of Ralph. I'm reading on 20 here about that whole process of election, and they're having a vote, voting for a chief. And let's see. I'll jump into here. Let's see. Him with the shell. Ralph, let him be chief with the trumpet thing. Ralph raised a hand for silence. All right. Who wants Jack for chief? So he's at least proposing that he's not just going to take it. He's going to see how they feel about Jack. With dreary obedience, the choir raised their hands. Who wants me? Every hand outside the choir except Piggy's was raised immediately. That is, who wants Ralph? Then Piggy too raised his hand grudgingly into the air. Ralph counted. I'm chief then. I think that Piggy was a little reluctant to vote for Ralph because of how Ralph had insulted him about his name.
Well,
okay, so then Ralph is chief. The circle of the boys broke into applause. Even the choir applauded. And the freckles on Jack's face disappeared under a blush of mortification. He started up, then changed his mind, and then he sat down while the air rang. Ralph looked at him, eager to offer something. The choir belongs to you, of course. They could be the army or hunters. They could be. And the suffusion drained away from Jack's face, and Ralph waved again for silence. So it seems that Ralph at least has enough sense to let Jack save face, let's say, in this election. Even though that Ralph won, he let Jack save face through this.
Well, Judy, I mean, a meaner part of Ralph's personality shows up. I mean, in his assumption of leadership by offering Piggy up as a sacrifice, by exposing Piggy's confidentially acknowledged weakness. That is a way for Ralph to ingratiate himself to the others. I mean, it's a real weakness in Ralph, and again, kind of a commentary on how people interact when they first meet other people.
Okay, example of microaggression, I'd say too, right? What about the idea of the conch? Whose idea was it to use the conch as part of the governing process, or the whatever you want to call it? Whose idea was that?
I think it was Piggy's.
Okay. I think Peggy and Ralph both spotted the conch in the water at about the same time, and they got it out of the water. And then Peggy said that, if we want to use this, we can do so as a way to control who gets to speak, so that you're not all speaking at the same time, and like raising your hand in class. He even used that example back in school days. And
when they found the conch, Piggy knew that it could be blown.
yes. Oh, yeah. Not only that, right. Was to blow it like a trumpet. And Jack first thought he heard a trumpet when he heard it. Mm-hmm. And then they found out it was simply a shell it was blown into. It was a way to gather the boys. Okay, so that maybe is one of the very first attempts to build community, is to gather whoever the group is together, and then elect a chief, decide some protocols about how you're going to operate in an assembly, using the conch as a way to decide who speaks first, who speaks second, and that sort of thing. But soon, we have people that ignore the conch. I'm on 33 now, reading in the second chapter. This would be about 3 or 4 pages in. And Ralph waved the conch. Shut up. Wait, listen. He went on in silence, borne on his triumph. There's another thing. We can help them to find us. If a ship comes near the island, they may notice us. So we must make smoke on top of the mountain. We must make a fire. A fire. Make a fire. At once, half the boys were on their feet. Jack clamored among them, the conch forgotten. Come, follow me. The space under the palm trees was full of noise and movement. Ralph was on his feet too, shouting for quiet, but no one had heard him. All at once, the crowd swayed toward the island and was gone, following Jack. Even the tiny children went and did their best among the leaves and broken branches. Ralph was left holding the conch with no one but Piggy. So early on, there's this vying for power, and what attracts people? Why did the people follow Jack rather than stay with Ralph? Any observations about that?
His personality, his charisma. He was the leader of the choir, and so he automatically had them following, and then they got assigned to be the hunters. But I think he just had presence.
Okay.
Well,
and Ralph had maybe a little less self-confident. Go, Deborah.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say the action, I mean, it created an action, and it led to a possible rescue. So, I mean, that was, I think people want to do something.
Okay. Yeah. So he had a plan, in effect, a plan. He was offering a plan.
Well,
right.
And I think fire represents a kind of violence. There's excitement in fire, and it's something that would attract boys, certainly, and kind of there's just the idea of doing something exciting.
Right. And backing backward just one page, and that's when somebody introduces, not only are we going to use this conch to decide who's recognized and speaking, but we're going to have rules. And Jack was on his feet. We'll have rules, he cried excitedly. Lots of rules. Then when anyone breaks them, wee-oh, wacko, bump, think. He wants rules, but he's using rules as a way that he can suddenly then have a way to punish people. That's Jack's notion of rules. It's not like orderliness and laws, but it's a way to find offenders and punish them. And I think we get a little flavor here that gets developed later of Jack's authoritarian kind of tendencies. He wants to, in a way, be a dictator, and the fact that he often interrupts those that have the conch and exercises his power, displaying the knife at one point to say, in effect, I've got a knife, you don't. And so listen and follow me. I think he was contributing to that power struggle.
Yeah. And the conch sort of represents democracy. Ralph's
Yes.
attempt at some kind of gentle, orderly, communal operation of the group.
That's right. So whoever had the conch, and it was given out to whoever raised their hand, I think it was sort of like equality and the ability to speak to, bring ideas to the assembly. It was a democratic tool, right? And then let's see, we'll jump ahead to, I think what becomes a crisis that really points out the side taking in this. And the crisis occurs when the fire goes out. Who wants to just set the scene for us about that whole episode where it really seems that Ralph and Jack are split?
Well, I think that the one thing about hunting for food versus maintaining the fire, and in the beginning they could keep the fire going, but it took piling all the wood. And first of all, they got the big giant fire going, and then it burned down half the place. So then they realized they had to be more.
Right. Right.
Well, that, you know, and that must have been fearsome, because when you see a fire out of control like we've seen in California or
Oh my, yes.
So anyway, with all this dry grass burning, but then I know if you've ever have a fire in a fireplace, it takes constant maintenance of adding another log and not getting it to burn up too fast, and then just keeping it going. So in
Sure.
that cold, they wanted to play and swim and rest and get fruit and all the other things. So keeping the fire going was not working well, and the hunters didn't want to work at that at all. So and if it went out, the only way they could start another fire was with Piggy's glasses of reflecting on the dry moss and stuff, and then getting a little spark to start. So so, you know, the dilemma is really of are you going to play and hunt and just fool around, or is somebody going to really stay? And I think the twins were there, and one was supposed to stay awake and the other one was supposed to sleep, and then vice versa, intending this fire, but they both fell asleep.
That's right.
And they woke up,
Right.
and there's this pile of dry ashes, and then they're saying, well, what are we going to do now? And so it's kind of work versus pleasure, sort of, and that dichotomy of that long, slow slog of just doing something repetitious. But if you don't do it, you lose the fire. And
Right.
so-
And Ralph, I think, was also interested in having people build shelters, and equally important to shelter is food. And Jack was going to be interested in getting them pigs to eat. So the food. And so you have in a way two different goods against each other, shelter and food. And of course, the leisure versus work is another variation.
Right. I was going to point out how a hierarchy of needs comes up here, gets introduced.
Okay, go ahead on that.
Well, at first, the fire was the most exciting thing. So that was, you had deliberating or fire making. And of course, fire making is going to attract. But eventually, that tending the fire got to be a little bit boring, and hunting was now the big thing. So I think that when Ralph tries to assert the seriousness of what's gone on, Jack he's not able to deny it, that a major error has happened, but he deflects it right away by saying, but we've got to hunt, we need food, we do need to eat. And so there's that you brought up the contention of between two things that are necessary, and yet one's more exciting than the other, so it automatically gets the attention.
Well, I think the fire was really the one hope for getting rescued, because if someone would see smoke coming from this island, the ship passing by, that would be their way of letting them know there were people there. But because this really was an uninhabited island, and most place ships would just slide right on by. So I think that Ralph always was thinking about rescue too. I think that was main in his goal, not just a fire for warmth or for heat or something, but the rescue.
Yes, in chapter 4, we do have a ship that goes nearby, and this is calls forth a kind of crisis. There's a ship that gets close enough, and Ralph is looking up, and there's no smoke for that ship to see, And so he is upset, and he says, I'm reading on page 62, it's in chapter 4. Oh God, the fire was dead. And then Ralph is talking to Simon and Maurice, and he said, they let the bloody fire go out. And here we have, I think, a kind of, it's not we let the fire go out, but it's they let the fire go out. And so we have, again, Ralph is on one side of things, and we have an othering that's going on here. And at the very same time, within the next page, Jack and his boys are coming back chanting in a procession, and they're chanting, kill the pig, cut her throat, spill her blood. And this chant gets repeated in the novel several times later on. And Jack says in response to they let the fire go out, look, we killed a pig. We stole up on him. We got in a circle, and he goes into all of the details about chasing the pig and finally getting it. And again, he sort of steals the narrative in contemporary terms here. Ralph's story gets totally forgotten or put aside because Jack has a lot more interesting story to tell, a narrative about how they killed this pig. And the description of the pig killing is very, it's brutal. I mean, they're poking at it. There's all kind of almost sexual imagery of sexual violence against the sow. It's a female pig. And that shows up in here as well.
When and Judy, the excitement about killing the pig, as opposed to maintaining these less exciting infrastructural duties of the society, it reminds me of the interest people can have in military, especially kind of nationalistic moments of military urgency, as opposed to taking care of things like education and health, et cetera.
Oh yeah, right. Military conflict is a lot more interesting and flashy, sexy, whatever than these basic things, maintenance things.
Shows in the U.S. budget.
Yeah, right. It shows up, definitely. Yes.
And look at it. Just jumped in my mind. Just look at the militia groups.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where the military and the guns.
Mm-hmm.
Always eager to find pigs to kill.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. In the chapter 5, about 3 or 4 pages in, Ralph and Peggy are talking. Ralph went on and he said, we have lots of assemblies. Everybody enjoys speaking and being together. We decide things, but they don't get done. We were going to have water brought from the stream and left in these coconut shells under fresh leaves. So it was for a few days. Now there's no water. The shells are dry. People drink from the river. So they're finding that some of their plans don't work out as first discussed. And so you get a kind of decay of legitimacy, let's say. You get legitimacy by having people all agree with what the leader is planning. That helps to establish legitimacy. But when you find that the plans that are made, votes that are made, don't get followed through, people begin to question that. And I think you could probably you can imagine that the boys are seeing that Jack is at least bringing food to the table. And as far as keeping the fire going and maybe having shelters that are decent, that's not happening so well. And so I think that the scale is tipping in the direction of Jack away from Ralph, probably even as beginning in chapter 5, if not before.
Even in the introduction, when it comes right out and says that Ralph is a representation of democracy.
Right.
Yes, he is chosen as the chief in a democratic fashion, and he holds the meetings, but there's no, other than Jack and the hunters, there's no infrastructure that allows the things to get done that
Right.
need to be done. So he
Right.
makes his proclamation, oh, we have to have water, we have to build the shelters, but there's nothing that motivates the kids to get it done.
Right. There are no adults in the room.
Yeah.
One's kind of analogous to, to having, to having ideas and initiatives, but unless you're going to commit resources, pay taxes,
Mhm.
or something, it's not going to happen.
That's right. Right. I'm reading now on page 75. It's still in chapter 5, just after what I read before. Someone is commenting, they stand on the platform. Things are breaking up. I don't understand why. We began well, we were happy, and then he moved the conch gently, looking beyond them at nothing, remembering the beastie, the snake, the fire, the talk of fear. Then people started getting frightened. What role does fear play in this thing?
I think it's a lot. They don't know exactly what they're frightened of. This little boy kind of wakes up and tells them this big beastie is there, and it's
Right, the boy with the scar on his face talked about that. Yeah.
And so then they feel like they have to capture it, and they look all over the island. They go climbing all over the place, and really don't see it. But I think the fear of the unknown, when it's something that might be threatening to you, you don't know what it is, and you don't know how to fight back, and they can't quite see it. They don't know what it really looks like. Was it really a dream or is it real? And yeah, it gets interesting.
I'm reading further in chapter 5, probably about 3 or 4 pages from the end of chapter 5, which is titled Beast from Water. And the world, that understandable and lawful world, was slipping away. Once there was this and that, and now, and the ship had gone. The conch was snatched from his hands, and Piggy's voice shrilled. I didn't vote for no ghosts. He whirled around the assembly. Remember that, all of you. And then I think it's Piggy starts saying some more. He says, what are we, humans or animals or savages? What's grown-ups going to think? Going off, hunting pigs, letting the fires go out. And now he's trying to come to Ralph's defense. And a shadow fronted them temporarily or tempestuously. You shut up, you fat slug. This is probably Jack speaking. There was a moment's struggle, and the glimmering conch jiggled up and down. Ralph leaped to his feet. Jack, you haven't got the conch. Let him speak. Jack's face swam near him. And you shut up. Who are you anyway? Sitting there telling people what to do. You can't hunt. You can't sing. I'm chief. I was chosen. Why should choosing make you any different? Ralph says, I'm chief. I was chosen. And then Jack says, why should choosing make any difference? Just giving orders. That doesn't make any sense. Piggy's got the conch. That's right. Favor Piggy as you always do. Jack's voice sounded in bitter mimicry. Jack, the rules, shouted for Ralph. You're breaking the rules. Who cares? Ralph summoned his wits. Because the rules are the only thing we've got. But Jack was shouting against them. Bollocks to the rules. We're strong. We hunt. If there's a beast, we'll hunt him down. We'll close in and beat and beat and beat. And he gave a loud whoop. And so, again, you're having this reason is overcome by power and by emotion, by fear, perhaps. You're seeing, again, Jack asserting himself, and the legitimacy of what Ralph and Piggy had tried to put together is eroded considerably.
I'm just looking at this book now, and it's Piggy speaking, and he said, I've been in bed so much, I've done some thinking. I know about people. I know about me and him. He can't hurt you, but if you stand out of the way, he'd hurt the next thing, and that's me. Piggy's right, Ralph. That's you and Jack. Go on being chief. Because they're really afraid of Jack because he's a mean kid, and he's willing to hurt people. And Piggy realizes if Ralph isn't there to protect him, he's gone.
That's right.
It's interesting that how perceptive Piggy is about the relationships of the people in the group.
Yes, yes. And then later on, not too far into the future here, somebody shoves, I think Jack or somebody shoves Piggy to the point where his glasses fall off and one of the lenses breaks. And there's a separation where Jack takes his men off to a part of the island where the hunting occurs, and Ralph and Piggy and maybe the twins are left to another part of the island, the original part where they were. And at night, Jack and some of his people come in and steal the glasses, the one frame left that had the lenses in, so that they could then have control of fire. That thieving went on as well. And on page 123, this would be what chapter? Jumping ahead here. He considers himself to be the real chief of the choir boys and so on. 138, we get Peggy again. He's functioning again as like the runt and the scapegoat. 138, let me read some there. This is the chapter called A View to the Death. I'm reading about 5 pages into that chapter, chapter 9, A View to the Death. A view to a death. At this moment, the boys who were cooking at the fire suddenly hauled off a great chunk of meat and ran with it toward the grass. They bumped Piggy, who was burnt, and yelled and danced. Immediately, Ralph and the crowd of boys were unified and relieved by a storm of laughter. Piggy once more was the center of social derision, so that everyone felt cheerful and normal. To me, this is almost a statement of the whole theory of a scapegoat. That is, you find, if you've got problems in your community, you've got people that don't get along, you find one person who is maybe the weakest one, and you declare that person a scapegoat, and you remove that person from the community. And then the assumption is that all the bad things that have been happening have been placed, though all those bad things are placed on the scapegoat's back, and when he leaves the community, then everything will be fine again. This is a concept that comes out of Old Testament Judaism. The scapegoat is a sacrificial means to try to make things right in a community by getting rid of a weak member of the community. And I think Piggy in some ways was functioning this way. Let's see. And Jack asserts his authority again more on the bottom of that page after what I was just reading. Jack spoke, "Give me a drink," and Henry brought him a shell and he drank, watching Peggy and Ralph over the jagged rim. Power lay in the brown swell of his forearms, that of Jack. Authority sat on his shoulder and chatted in his ear like an ape. So again, this is way that William Golding is explicitly stating that Jack now has more power than anyone else. I'll continue to read here. I'm on the top of 139 in my book. This is where Jack really takes the whole group away for sure. The boys arranged themselves in rows on the grass before him, but Ralph and Peggy stayed a foot lower, standing on the left soft sand. Jack ignored them for the moment and turned his mask down to the seated boys and pointed at them with the spear. "Who's going to join my tribe?" Ralph made a sudden movement that became a stumble. Some of the boys turned toward him. "I gave you food," said Jack, "and my hunters will protect you from the beast. Who will join my tribe?" "I'm chief," said Ralph, "because you chose me, and we were going to keep the fire going. Now you run after food." "You ran yourself," said Jack. "Look at that bone in your hands." Ralph went crimson. "I said you were hunters. That was your job." Jack ignored him again. "Who'll join my tribe and have fun? I'm chief," said Ralph tremulously. "And what about the fire? I've got the conch." "You don't have it with you," said Jack, sneering. "You left it behind." see clever and the conch doesn't count at this end of the island. And so again, this standoff and breaking of sides.
I don't think we have talked about one character who is Simon.
Yeah, let's talk about Simon.
He was, because he must be about the age, he's one of the older ones.
Right, he was one of the three that helped to explore the island on that first day or
Right.
night. Yeah,
Right.
It was Jack, Ralph, and Simon was sort of the smaller one between the two. Yeah, go ahead, Anne.
But he would go off. He had found a special refuge in the woods, in the forest, with a mat, a very tangled and hard to get to place. And he would go off out there by himself. And I didn't really grasp what he was supposed to represent, but he stayed, he stayed loyal to Ralph with Piggy. And for a while, the three of them together were the only ones that were holding things together with the little ones.
What did he see when he was off in his little kind of secluded place in the woods? There was something that he saw at some point.
Well, two things. He saw
Yes.
first he saw the pig's head with the flies that Jack and the hunters had left the head of a pig that they had slaughtered on a stake in the forest.
A two-headed stake, a stake that was pointed at both
Yes.
ends. That was
Which
significant. That
became
comes up
very
later too. Yeah, go
significant
ahead.
at the end. But and there were flies all around, and the head spoke to him, and that was the Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, and that, the Lord of the Flies, I think it is related in some ways to Beelzebub, an Old Testament idol, a god that was like a foreign devil god.
Yes.
And so this pig's head represents a kind of foreign devil god. And the flies around it, kind of an iridescent blue, green kind of color around us. But go ahead, Phil.
Oh, I wasn't trying to interrupt. I was
Yeah, go
having
ahead.
trouble with my button. But
Okay.
you were asking about what he saw, and I think the literal thing that he sees is the wind blows the parachute that the pilot was still trapped in.
Right,
The
that's the
pilot
second
is
thing
dead
he
in
sees.
that
That's the
summer.
second thing. Yes, yes.
Right. And so that's the literal thing he sees, but that then becomes identified. That is what the kid with the scar had seen. So that in essence is the beast
Right.
that we've seen. And I don't know if I ever completely figured out the relationship between that representation of their past as the beast and this the head of the pig representing the beast, whether they're two different things or whether
I think they're two different. They're two different objects. I think they're two physical objects. There's the pig head that's on the spear. That's one thing, and that's it attracts the flies. The Lord of the Flies, Beelzebub. And then there's that second thing, and that's the parachute. It's caught in his parachute that was in effect a corpse at this point, and he sees that something that had dropped out of the sky, and it would be a fearful thing. Both things are rather fearful. Those are two things that Simon saw that the other ones didn't, and that makes him in some ways special. It marks him as a seer of sorts. But anybody else make more sense out of that? Simon's role in this evil stuff.
Somebody noted that Piggy is socially perceptive, and Simon is the one who is spiritually perceptive.
Yes.
And
right.
so
and Simon suggests too that the evil might be just something within ourselves. I think he states that as much. Yes.
Yeah. But the ironic thing, of course, is that on his second sighting of the beast, when he sights the parachute, then he realizes that this is the beast that they were fearing. And he runs down to tell people that the beast is gone because it's now pushed away and gone into the ocean. he comes down to tell people that the beast is gone. And of course, then at that point, they swarm and kill him.
Where does that happen? I want to look at that because I think I'm trying to find it myself here. Let me see if I can put my fingers on it. So.
At the end of A View of Death, A View to a Death.
Okay. Yes,
About
yes.
4 pages.
Yeah, right. Okay,
Still
yes,
the-
I found this spot. It's on the second page from the end of the chapter of You to the Death. I will read some of this. There was a circle of the boys, and the circle became a horseshoe. A thing was crawling out of the forest. That thing was Simon.
Mhm.
And the fact that it's called a thing already has Simon dehumanized in front of all the other boys. And this is not a quote. This is William Golding's words. A thing was crawling out of the forest. It came darkly, uncertainly. The shrill screaming that rose before the beast was like a pain. And so again, that thing is a beast, and it's really Simon. Was like a pain. The beast stumbled into the horseshoe, and then you get this chant again: "Kill the beast! Cut his throat! Spill his blood!" The blue-white scar was constant. The noise, the scar, that would be this lightning. It's thundering and lightning are in the middle of a storm. The noise, unendurable. Simon was crying and out something about a dead man on a hill. And that's that parachutist that was caught in his parachute that he had seen. Then kill the beast, cut his throat, spill his blood, do him in. You get this chanting again. And eventually, Simon is killed. Very last sentence in that paragraph, in that chapter. Simon's dead body moved out toward the open sea. So this is the first deliberate killing that we see in the book. And of course, the second killing is who? Who gets killed the second one that gets killed?
Piggy.
Piggy. How does that happen?
Well, the tribe, Jack's tribe has relocated to the Castle Rock, which has a number of huge boulders that are precarious, that they've discovered that they can, with a lever, that they can move. And when Ralph and Piggy came, they released one rock, I believe, down on them, but then they released a second rock, which swept Piggy away and killed him.
Right. And earlier on in this book, I don't know chapter and verse right now, but early on, the person who dislodged the stone, you know who that was?
Roger.
Yeah, it was Roger. And earlier on in one of the chapters, there was an instance where Roger was throwing stones at another person whose name was Henry. And he was throwing them carefully so as not to hit Henry, but just frighten him. And the statement was made at that point that it seemed that Roger at least had enough of civilization in him still to have this inhibition that he would not deliberately put stones towards one of his friends, let's say a colleague. But by this point, he has deliberately let loose the rock that would fall down and kill Piggy. And it happens. That's the second one that is killed in this story. And Piggy before this had gone with Ralph to try to plead with Jack's group. And I'm reading now on page 156, the chapter is called Castle Rock, and it's chapter 11, about 3 or 4 pages into it. Piggy paused for a moment and he peered around at the dim figures. The shape of the old assembly trodden in the grass listened to him. I'm going to him with this conch in my hands, and I'm going to hold it out. Look, I'm going to say, you're stronger than I am, and you haven't got asthma. You can see. I'm going to say, and with both eyes. But I don't ask for my glasses back, not as a favor. I don't ask you to be a sport, I'll say. Not because you are strong, but because what's right. What's right's right. Give me my glasses, I'm going to say, and you got to. And then Piggy ended flushed and trembling, and he pushed the con quickly back to Ralph's hands. This is a plea for justice. And when I look at the Kohlberg's list that you received as a handout, I think that this is stage 6 of that. I'll read, if you got your pages handy here, it's at Lawrence Kohlberg, 6 Stages of Moral Development. There are several stages here. The first one where rules are important, and we saw that happening early in this book about the importance of having rules. That would be stage 1. Egocentric heteronymous orientation focuses on avoiding breaking rules that are backed by punishment, obedience for its own sake, and avoiding the physical consequences of an action to persons and property. We saw that early on, a desire to have rules and to punish people for breaking them. Then the next stage in moral development is trying to have exchanges, have agreements, deals. And I think that some of that happened, I think, with their assembly and with Ralph's wanting to include Jack's people, that Jack could have his group of people working with him and Ralph would have the other ones. I think that shows maybe the second stage of this moral development. Then we get some more stages where individuals are aware of shared feelings, agreements, and expectations, which take over primacy over individual interests. You have a motive to do good because of what you will do for the group rather than just yourself. And then later on, let's see. Then stage 4 is right is defined not so much by local norms and role expectations as by laws and norms established by the larger social system. Well, they don't have a larger social system on this island, and that's part of their problem. Obeying the law is seen as necessary in order to maintain the system of laws which protect everyone. But you've seen that the legitimacy of that has just crumbled and eroded away. So that's not working for them. Then we get to stage 5. Right is based on principles which underlie the rules and forms. And we have these rules, but because of certain reasons that the rules help to bring about, that's why you have the rules. There's some underlying principles behind them. And then that last stage, stage 6, is fairness. Laws are evaluated in terms of their coherence with basic principles of fairness rather than upheld simply on the basis of their place within an existing social order. And I think at this point, when Piggy is planning to go to talk to Jack about, you've got to give me back my glasses, the broken ones, because that's just simply the right thing to do. He's reached that stage. And so I just thought this was just an interesting little, I don't know what I would say, a structure that we could put in side by side with the novel to see maybe how these work. I did check up on this. Lawrence Kohlberg, he received his doctorate from the University of Chicago in 1958. And this book was published in 1954. And so I think that Golding was not aware of these 6 stages of moral development. He wasn't aware of Kohlberg when he wrote the book, but I think there's an interesting pairing that you can make between the principles that Kohlberg set out and some of what you see as moral development in this book. I think if there's moral development, is probably the one who started out with most and ended out with most was Piggy. And probably Ralph next, and Jack, of course, is a might makes right person. If you've got the strength, then you can be the ruler, which is a very low level kind of morality, if it's a morality at all. Any comments that you have on what you see as the values that are portrayed in this book versus what are the good things and what are the evil things that you pick up by reading this novel? Anybody?
Well, I guess the evil to me is the disintegration of the society, of going from the beginning of somewhat cooperation to the splitting off of the hunters, to the first pig slaughter where the dancing started. And then they started painting their faces
And wearing masks.
and wearing, well, by mask, I don't know whether by
Or-
masks they meant just
Yeah,
real masks or whether it was just painted.
yeah, the painting or the mask or whatever it is, it makes for anonymity that you
Mhm.
can't really see who's doing what.
Right.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
And just, you know, from that very next page from where you're talking, but they're painted. They understood only too well the liberation into savagery that the concealing paint brought. Well, we won't be painted, said Ralph, because we are not savages.
Okay, that's the difference there. Okay, savagery versus humanity.
Yeah.
I think that's a contrasting value in here that we pick up.
When I keep thinking of this in kind of the context of being written after seeing the rise of fascism, World War II, totalitarian communism, and McCarthyism, and just try to going looking at this and trying to see how strongman demagoguery turns into oppressive or violent authoritarianism kind of stuff. It just in this small community.
I think it's he wrote this in 1954, and I think he was strongly moved by World War II. One of the commentators on this novel wrote an article, "Power and Authority: An Interpretation of Golding's Lord of the Flies," and I'll read some comment from that ties closely with what you just said, Thomas. Golding stated to an American audience the overall intention of the work. Before the Second World War, I believed in the perfectibility of social man, that a correct structure of society would produce goodwill, and that therefore you could remove all the social ills by a reorganization of society. It is possible that today I believe something of the same again, but after the war, I did not, because I was unable to. I had discovered that one man could do to another. I had discovered what one man could do to another. I am not talking of one man killing another with a gun or dropping a bomb on him or blowing him up or torpedoing him. I am thinking of the vileness beyond words, and that went on year after year in the totalitarian states. It's bad enough to say that so many Jews were exterminated in this way and that, so many people liquidated, lovely, elegant word. But there were things done during that period from which I still have to avert my mind lest I should be physically sick. They were not done by the headhunters of New Guinea or by some primitive tribe of the Amazon. They were done skillfully, coldly, by educated men, doctors, lawyers, by men with a tradition of civilization behind them, to beings of their own kind. I must say that anyone who moved through these years without understanding that man produces evil as a bee produces honey must have been blind or wrong in the head. I believed then that man was sick, not exceptional man, but average man. I believed that the condition of man was to be a morally diseased creation, and that the best job I could do at the time was to trace the connection between his diseased nature and the international mess he gets himself into. This is a quotation from William Golding back in the 50s. So it's a bit long-winded, but you get where he's coming from.
My understanding is that he was directly reacting to the Coral Island based on his experience as having to fight during the Second World War, and had made some kind of comment. I even forget who the author of the Coral Island was, but made some that
Valentine was the author.
Valentine did not endure World War II.
Right.
Or I
And
don't
I think
even
World War I caused a lot of disillusionment about people thinking that we're in a progress and we're getting better. And then if World War I didn't do it, World War II disabused a lot of people of their optimism and idealism of the human condition. But, some people criticize him for saying that he's maybe too negative. Do you think he was a little bit too heavy-handed with this, or what do you think, Deborah?
Well, I think a couple things. I think the fear refers to the cloud of the atomic bomb as to when this was written.
Right.
And the other thing, when you were reading that, you know, it referred to men are this, men are that, evil in man, blah, blah, blah. And I'm assuming he's using man in a non-gendered way, but
I think so. I think so. Back in the 50s, that's probably the case. Yes.
Right. But it took me to my mind to a rewrite of this story with a group of young girls. And is
Yes.
that even
That
feasible?
was that Coral Island that had girls in it rather than guys? Do you happen to recall, Phil?
I don't think that the one that Golding was writing in reaction to was about girls. I think the one about girls took place was written after Golding.
Okay.
At least
Excuse
that's
me for
just,
interrupting.
if I had to guess, that's what I would say.
Okay, Deborah, go ahead.
Okay, so I guess I'm not familiar with that. So maybe I need to look at that to answer my own question, my own one.
Yeah, right. I think there was a similar story of people lost on an island, and they were girls, and they managed a lot better than this situation.
Prison in Iraq, the Abu Ghraib, and that was men and women, and what they subjected the Iraqi prisoners to. It was not only men, it was women, and having them undress and terrorizing them with dogs and threatening them about their families. And you know, I think the inhumanity of man to man is just incredible. And we, you know, trying to pass laws that saying we could do all this torture when it's against the Geneva Convention. So it's not just then, it's now. I mean, it's with us. I mean, it's kind of the thinking about the other and be treated inhumanely, and who is the other? But we're all brothers and sisters in humanity, and that's the hard part.
That's right. There's a psychologist named Zimbardo who did some studies about how people sometimes, depending on what their role they see themselves in, can get so wrapped up in a role that they end up doing things they might not do as their everyday life selves. They had people taking the role of prisoners and other people taking the role of prison guards, and the people taking the role of prison guards became so violent and so out of control that they had to stop the experiment. And I think it's somewhat the Abu Ghraib situation was, if you got men and women and they are both in military garb and they have the authority of the military behind them, they will act in ways that they might not act if they were just walking down 8th Street in Holland shopping for clothes or something. You know, that somehow people are, they take on aspects of their role that somehow make them other than who they are as a human being.
I think tribalism is very powerful.
Yes, and go on. What do you mean by tribalism?
It's not even just you. It's, I think, at Abu Ghraib, I don't know how to say it, but I mean, it was your comrades and your fellow soldiers. You're part of a group. You'll do things in a group that you won't do as a person. And I think it's very relevant to the past election as well. Something about being part of a tribe lets you say things and do things that you wouldn't otherwise do.
Oh yeah, it reminds me of the group of men that armed themselves and went to the state capitol here in Michigan. They might not have done this in their own community, but they did it elsewhere. There's a kind of anonymity to that. Plus, they were in a group. There was a fellow named Niebuhr who wrote a highly regarded nonfiction work called Moral Man and Immoral Society, which kind of supports what you were saying, Jean, that when people are in groups, they maybe act in ways that are different or more negative than when they are just doing things alone and they are easily identified. I'd like to read one other comment it's at the end of my novel. It's some notes from William Golding, and he says that the theme of The Lord of the Flies is described by Golding as follows. The theme is an attempt to trace the defects of society back to the defects of human nature. The moral is that the shape of a society, the moral is that the shape of a society must depend on the ethical nature of the individual and not on any political systems, however apparently logical or respectable. The whole book is symbolic in nature, except the rescue at the end, where adult life appears dignified and capable, but in reality enmeshed in the same evil as the symbolic life of the children on the island.
Mhm.
How did you feel about the ending? It seemed to me like the old Greek plays, the old Greek tragedies that had what we call the Deus ex machina, that is, God appears from the machine. There's a, you know, a pulley, and you get this God coming from the skies to somehow bring order and some sort of conclusion to the tragedy that's depicted on the stage. Do you think that this ending, that certainly was sudden? You've got this several pages, maybe chapters even, of Ralph trying to escape from Jack and his boys, and just suddenly appears on the scene a military officer who is there to rescue them, and he's come in on a cruiser of some sort, a boat of some sort. Did that strike you at all as being too contrived, or you got to end this thing somehow, and maybe that's a liberty that he can take, that is Golding's liberty to end it however he wants to? Any comments about what you thought about the ending?
Well, I questioned that as soon as I read it. The boys had basically destroyed the island. They were getting ready to kill Ralph and cut off his head and put it on a stake. Why did they get rescued? And then at least my edition has got critical analysis afterwards by E.M. Forrester. And according to him, the bringing of the officer was tying things together to the adult world.
Yes.
Because the boat that he had machine guns on it, and he and the Navy were going to rescue the boys, but then they were going to go off and take part in exactly the same kind of war that the boys were taking part of on the island.
Right. So the adult world is not going to be any different from where they were.
No.
Okay. Very depressing ending. Yeah. Sue?
Well, when the guy gets here, he was disappointed in them, but he doesn't know half of it. I mean, you know, he's kind of thinking you're all so ratty and looking horrible and whatever, but he has no clue what's gone on in the last few weeks of the fighting amongst themselves and the killing and torture and whatever. And so, I mean, he's making an assessment, but he knows so little. And I think Ralph felt some of that. You know, he's saying, well, you guys didn't take care of yourself. And Ralph's thinking, you have no idea. It just seemed kind of, the adult was missing so much because he didn't really take what had happened and didn't ask any questions or look around much. And so he was so judgmental without knowing anything. It kind of.
And after Simon was killed, Peggy and Ralph talked together, and they exercise a bit of denial, I think. You know, they're saying, you know, like they're trying to convince each other that this was an accident, right? We didn't really intend that he would be killed, but it just happened. And I think the boys at the end are probably trying to explain themselves in somewhat similar ways. They can't quite comprehend the extent to which they went down so fast.
I've always thought it was a particularly good ending, dramatically, with the intensity of that chase and the fear on the fear Ralph has, and the fear we have as readers as we're running along with it, and the threat at our heels, and then slam faced with redemption that also has that ironic realization that we're not out of this yet. I think we're brought kind of face to face. Either you have Ralph who's crying, and the officer there looking down on him, and wondering what what has happened here, what is going on, and we as the readers looking at the officer, wondering when the officer is going to realize what's going on. I don't know. I didn't explain that very well, but I've always thought that's a powerful way to bring what we've gone through into confrontation with the world we actually live in.
Yeah, I think you're onto something. I do think there is a relief. You've got this awful chase, and you don't know how in the world it's going to end. Probably badly, but just suddenly there's this, as you say, a redemptive moment when you find out that there is rescue at hand. And I want to read the words of the officer. He says, "I should have thought," said the officer as he visualized the search before him, "I should have thought that a pack of British boys, you're all British, aren't you, would have been able to put up a better show than that. I mean," and then we get Ralph kind of stammering to what his understanding of it was. Somehow the expectation that British boys would somehow be, well, they've got an orderly government, let's say, behind them, the parliamentary system and kings, queens, or whatever. Go ahead, Tom.
Well, I was going to say, from the author's viewpoint, he offers for the reader. There's this hope. There's this the salvation of Ralph and everything, and then he follows that, as you've been saying, with this ironic. It's an ironic twist, but also then he kind of moves the context of this Hobbesian kind of world from this faraway, imaginary desert, ocean island, and moves it into our current day world with the boat with the guns, and so he's saying, so we think here's the allegory, move it into reality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anything else that any of you want to bring up? Anything you didn't understand, or a part you thought was especially effective? Anyone want to speak to that? Anyone?
I just think the language in this last 2 pages is really, Ralph looked at him dumbly. For a moment, he had a fleeting picture of the strange glamour that once invested the beaches. But the island was scorched up like dead wood. Simon was dead, and Jack had. The tears began to flow and sobs shook him. He gave himself up to them now for the first time on the island. Great shuddering spasms of grief seemed to wrench his whole body. His voice rose from under the black smoke before the burning wreckage of the island. And infected by that emotion, the other little boys began to shake and sob too. In the middle of them, with filthy body, matted hair, and unwiped nose, innocence, the darkness of man's heart, and the faulty air of the true wise friend called Piggy. And I think
that's wonderful, isn't it? It's great prose.
And you can just see those children just shaken to the core, and all of a sudden, everything they had faith in that was civilization is kind of crumbled before them. And I don't know how old these boys are, but I don't think they're any older than 12 or 13, 14. I don't know, pre-teens, I think, or early teens. And then the choir.
I think you're right. Yeah, and I think the little boys probably 5 and 6, maybe 7, and then the older ones maybe pre-teen, maybe in the early teens.
I think the boys in those choirs have to be able to still have a high.
Yeah, soprano voice. Yeah.
Right. They can't be too old. But
right.
Just the way those last 2 paragraphs are written just touched my heart. I mean,
yes.
It's so sad, but it's so beautifully written, and it just pictures the whole thread of the book, I guess. That's
right. The tears, that is catharsis, is the Greek word. It's a cleansing. It's a relief. That's how tragedies often end in the Greek tragedies, and with that kind of release of tears. Yeah.
Really, and they didn't even talk about the first little boy that just disappeared. They only talked about Simon, right? And Piggy, but they're really the third boy that we don't know what happened to him either. So it's
right, the boy with the birthmark. It just they know that he was there one time, but he's not there anymore, and who knows what happened to him. Yeah.
Anyway, it's really was good to read it again, Judy. I'm glad that I did it. I'm thinking of right now, and people are talking about on NPR today a little bit of if people in the accounts now and the this is a senior moment. What we have to wait now, and if they don't respond to what the numbers were in their state, but just make up their minds they're going to vote them however they feel like. And I thought that's the end of civilization. That's the end of democracy. We might be in the same place right now. You know, people just decide to follow the rules at all. Anyway.
Right. It's to me, I'm, you know, given what we've had in the last 4 years in this country, well, I during that time I did read Tolstoy's War and Peace to get away from what we've got around. It's just an escape in literature. And then I participated in the big read, get myself in the South Seas, but then encountered cannibalism amongst the people on the boat. And now I read The Lord of the Flies. I figure get myself lost on an island somewhere. Then that'll take me away from what we've got going on here. But all these things, you can't get away from them. And it's amazing. Yeah. Anything else that anybody wants to say? We've got about 2:30 at this point. Kim's joined us. Anything else? I think that what we want to do next time is talk a little bit about this real life positive experience of boys on an island. They get rescued after 15 months. There are only 6 of them. And we'll talk about how their experiences were different from what we have in The Lord of the Flies. Maybe why they were different, we can talk about that. And it's definitely a much more positive and optimistic book than this is. And also we'll talk about the first half of Shandong Compound, how it is that the people from various different groups get thrown together and have to make some sort of workable society, workable culture, workable way to live together. That next week and then the following week. Any comments or questions?
Was there a handout or something we were supposed to get? Because I don't remember getting that.
You didn't get a handout. Kim, could you send Sue Bolander the set of there were 3 readings. One of them, it was Kohlberg's page of moral development of children. And the other one was the positive story about boys on an island that succeeded in making a good life for themselves considerably, considering that they're just by themselves. And then the third piece is an article by David Myers talking about, you know, are we basically good or bad, or perhaps a mixture? Those are the 3 handouts. And we will spend some time, as I said just a minute ago, covering the one, another island experience that ended positively. And then we'll get into Shandong Compound. Next time.
I don't believe that I got that handout either.
It was sent out last Friday or over the weekend.
Under HASP.
Yeah, I'll send it again to Ann and Sue.
Thank you.
Come from the HASP account. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we'll see you a week from today. Thank you for participating. And I think it worked out to get around here like that, like our old